Stoicism isn't about rejecting human nature, it's about mastering it. The world tells us to chase every desire, but the Stoic man pauses. He looks inward. He asks, will this serve my peace? Passion, pleasure, and intimacy. They're powerful, yes, but they can chain the mind, fog our clarity, and erode our discipline. Abstaining from sex, as Stoics propose, isn't a denial, it's a choice. A choice to protect your reason, your focus, your soul. In a world obsessed with indulgence, the Stoic seeks freedom. And freedom starts when you stop being ruled by your flesh. The Stoic principle of freedom from passion and attachment emphasizes a deliberate separation from desires that can cloud the mind and disrupt rational judgment. From this perspective, sexual desire is not inherently evil or shameful, but it is viewed as a force that can overpower logic and distract from one's true path. The Stoics believe that the human mind is designed to function best when it is guided by reason, not dominated by impulses or intense emotional states. Passion, especially in the context of sexual intimacy, often leads to attachment, and attachment breeds dependence. Once an individual becomes emotionally entangled with another through the bond of physical intimacy, their thoughts, behaviors, and decisions may no longer be fully autonomous. They begin to react not from a place of reasoned understanding, but from a place of emotional vulnerability, fueled by fear, longing, or even jealousy. This deviation from rational clarity is what the Stoics seek to avoid. The choice to abstain from sexual activity becomes not a denial of pleasure, but a conscious act of self-preservation and mental discipline. The philosopher Epictetus reminds us that what lies within our control is where true freedom resides. Sexual desire is a response to an external stimulus. It arises without our bidding and seeks satisfaction, and often irrespective of the consequences. By choosing to abstain, the Stoic actively takes control over this impulse, refusing to allow it to dictate behavior. This form of inner control is the foundation of Stoic ethics, a refusal to let external events or emotions govern the inner state. Moreover, the practice of detaching from passion doesn't equate to emotional numbness. It signifies a higher form of engagement with oneself, where emotions are acknowledged but not obeyed blindly. The Stoic trains himself to recognize desire, understand its root, and then decide from a place of clarity whether or not to act on it. In doing so, he fortifies his willpower, reinforces his sense of autonomy, and aligns his actions with the pursuit of virtue rather than the pursuit of fleeting satisfaction. This detachment from passion, particularly sexual passion, ensures that one's moral compass remains steady and unshaken even amidst the most tempting circumstances. The second Stoic reason for abstaining from sexual intercourse is the avoidance of distractions caused by external pleasures. Stoicism emphasizes that the pursuit of fleeting external pleasures can easily derail an individual from the deeper, more enduring mission of cultivating virtue, wisdom, and moral clarity. Sexual gratification, in particular, is seen not only as a temporary pleasure, but as one that can consume the thoughts and behaviors of a person to the point where it becomes a central focus of life. When the mind is preoccupied with chasing sensual pleasure, it is no longer anchored in the calm waters of reason, but tossed around by ever-changing desires. Stoics believe that a life governed by external attractions leads to inner restlessness, because these pleasures are transitory and their pursuit becomes insatiable. Once satisfied, the desire soon returns, creating a cycle of craving, temporary fulfillment, and renewed longing. A cycle that ultimately traps the individual in a pattern of dependence and distraction. Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, wrote about the dangers of being enslaved to pleasure. He warned that when a person indulges excessively in sensual delights, their focus shifts from what is good and virtuous to what is pleasurable and easy. The discipline required to lead a noble life diminishes, replaced by impulsive actions driven by appetite. In this context, abstaining from sex becomes a practical method to eliminate one of the most powerful and invasive forms of external temptation. Sexual pleasure is not only physical, it often carries emotional weight, fantasies, expectations, and personal entanglements that anchor the mind in the world of external circumstances. From a Stoic standpoint, this anchors the soul to that which it cannot control: other people's bodies, desires, behaviors, and reactions. Furthermore, external pleasures, including those from sexual activity, often create illusions of happiness. They promise satisfaction and contentment, but in reality, they rarely deliver lasting peace. The Stoic is taught to be wary of such illusions. By abstaining, the Stoic seeks to sharpen his inner focus, eliminating distractions that can obscure the pursuit of virtue. This conscious refusal to chase external gratification allows for a reorientation of life's purpose towards self-improvement, intellectual growth, and emotional balance. It is a redirection from what is fleeting to what is timeless, from the superficial thrill of physical closeness to the profound joy of self-mastery. When one is no longer distracted by the desire for sexual pleasure, they free up immense mental and emotional space for reflection, study, work, and meaningful relationships based not on need, but on choice. Abstaining also fosters a deeper understanding of what true happiness is. Stoicism asserts that happiness does not come from external stimulation or gratification, but from living in accordance with nature, reason, and virtue. When the body is trained to not react impulsively to physical urges and the mind is disciplined to remain unmoved by temptation, the individual becomes more in control, more whole, and more aligned with their higher self. The distraction of external pleasures becomes less alluring as the inner world grows richer, more resilient, and more attuned to the values that lead to a well-lived life. This long-term reward of peace and purpose far outweighs the brief and often chaotic excitement of indulgence. Through this lens, sexual abstinence is not deprivation, it is liberation from the noise of the senses, allowing the soul to listen more clearly to the voice of reason. The third Stoic reason for abstaining from sexual intercourse centers on the importance of avoiding emotional turmoil, a key aspect of preserving inner tranquility. Stoicism teaches that the ideal state of being is one in which the individual is not constantly swayed by powerful emotions, but instead maintains a steady, rational mindset that is resilient in the face of external disturbances. Intimate relationships, particularly those involving sexual engagement, are known to give rise to complex emotional experiences such as jealousy, possessiveness, dependency, insecurity, and heartbreak. These emotional upheavals disrupt the inner harmony that Stoics strive to achieve. The Stoic path involves the pursuit of ataraxia, a deep and unwavering peace of mind that can only exist when one has mastery over their internal reactions. Sexual relationships, due to their inherently vulnerable and emotionally charged nature, introduce a high probability of losing that control. From the Stoic point of view, the emotions that stem from sexual intimacy are not necessarily wrong or unnatural, but they are dangerous when left unchecked. The more emotionally invested a person becomes in another through physical and romantic intimacy, the greater the risk of emotional dependence. This dependence means that one's inner peace becomes tied to the actions, attention, moods, and responses of another individual, something that lies entirely outside one's control. Stoic philosophers like Seneca warned repeatedly about the hazards of becoming emotionally enslaved, particularly in romantic contexts. He emphasized that emotional autonomy is central to a virtuous life, and when a person gives away that autonomy in the name of love or desire, they compromise their ability to live freely and rationally. The emotional turmoil brought on by romantic relationships can derail even the most disciplined minds. Feelings such as longing, fear of loss, resentment, or betrayal can dominate one's internal dialogue and cloud their reasoning. These emotions not only distort perception, but often lead to irrational decisions and regrettable actions. When a person is caught in emotional chaos, they are no longer acting from a place of wisdom, but reacting impulsively, often in ways that contradict their higher values. Stoicism calls for a life lived according to reason, where the self is sovereign and not subjected to the storms of unpredictable feelings. Abstaining from sexual relationships becomes a preventative measure, a protective strategy to shield the mind from being overtaken by such emotional disturbances. Furthermore, Stoicism holds that while we cannot always control what happens to us, we can control how we respond. Intimate relationships are fertile ground for unpredictable events, shifts in affection, betrayal, conflict, miscommunication, and loss. Each of these outcomes carries the potential for emotional suffering. While the non-Stoic might view this suffering as an unavoidable part of love, the Stoic sees it as something to be anticipated and circumvented through rational detachment. By abstaining from sexual intimacy, the Stoic reduces exposure to these emotionally volatile scenarios and thereby increases the likelihood of maintaining a clear, calm, and centered inner state. The Stoic approach to emotional discipline does not advocate for the suppression of feelings, but rather the development of a conscious awareness that allows one to engage with emotion without being governed by it. Abstaining from sex provides a context in which this discipline can flourish, allowing the individual to cultivate a deeper sense of self-awareness and emotional independence. It becomes a training ground for emotional resilience, a way of building the strength to encounter life's challenges without being destabilized. Emotional turmoil is seen not only as a personal disruption, but as an obstacle to the larger Stoic mission of living in accordance with nature, reason, and virtue. By sidestepping situations that are likely to give rise to emotional entanglement, the Stoic preserves mental clarity, sharpens judgment, and stays aligned with their ultimate goal, a life of harmony, integrity, and unwavering inner peace. The fourth key Stoic reason for abstaining from sexual intercourse is the assertion of autonomy over desire, a central tenet in Stoic ethics and self-mastery. According to Stoic philosophy, one of the greatest threats to a life of virtue and inner harmony is the unchecked influence of desire, especially those rooted in the body and its pleasures. Desire in this framework is not simply a feeling, but a powerful force that can dominate the mind, divert attention from rational thought, and enslave the will. Sexual desire, more than many others, carries with it a persuasive and urgent pull, often clouding judgment and making individuals act in ways they later regret. By choosing to abstain from sex, the Stoic makes a conscious declaration that he refuses to be governed by his appetites. He does not deny that desires exist, nor does he vilify them. Instead, he places them in proper context, as impulses that must be evaluated and managed through reason. To assert autonomy over desire is to claim full sovereignty over the self. It is to say that one's peace, decisions, and behaviors are not dictated by impulses or cravings, but are chosen with deliberation and clarity. This act of self-governance lies at the heart of Stoic strength. Epictetus, one of the most influential Stoic philosophers, frequently reminded his students that freedom is not found in satisfying every impulse, but in the power to say no. When a man has trained himself to resist the most compelling urges, he begins to experience true freedom. Not freedom to do whatever he wants at the moment, but freedom from being ruled by anything outside of himself. Sexual abstinence, then, becomes an arena in which this form of radical self-discipline can be exercised and reinforced. The body may cry out for gratification, but the Stoic trains the mind to respond with calm and unwavering self-possession. This form of self-discipline is not merely about restraint for the sake of moral superiority. It is about directing energy and attention toward what truly matters: virtue, purpose, and enduring fulfillment. Every time a person gives in to desire without reflection, they surrender a piece of their autonomy. They become more reactive and less intentional. The Stoic refuses to live this way. He understands that a life dominated by momentary urges leads to weakness, dependency, and regret. To assert autonomy over sexual desire is to reassert the primacy of the rational soul, to reclaim control from the chaos of the senses, and to stand firm in the face of temptation without needing to escape or suppress it. It is strength through awareness and resolve. Moreover, this Stoic stance does not reduce desire to a mere enemy to be battled. Rather, it calls for mastery through understanding. The Stoic studies his desires. He examines their origins, their patterns, and their effects. In doing so, he becomes intimate not with another person's body, but with the mechanisms of his own mind. This deep self-awareness is the foundation of philosophical life. It leads to a kind of freedom that cannot be taken away by fortune, circumstance, or other people. When sexual desire is no longer an uncontested ruler but a subject under reason's command, the individual becomes more centered, more focused, and more capable of meaningful achievement. He can walk through a world saturated with temptation without being led astray, because his compass is internal and unshakable. Seneca also warned that those who are ruled by their passions become slaves, not just to other people, but to themselves. They lose the ability to act with clarity because every decision becomes tinted with craving. In contrast, the Stoic who asserts control over his desires, who can abstain even when opportunity presents itself, demonstrates the rarest kind of power. He does not merely resist temptation, he is unmoved by it, not because he is numb or repressed, but because he has cultivated a soul that no longer needs to chase pleasure to feel whole. He chooses discipline not out of fear, but out of respect for the self and the recognition that true strength lies in restraint. Abstainin. From sexual activity is one way this strength manifests, creating space for integrity, inner stillness, and a life guided by principle rather than passion. The fifth Stoic reason for abstaining from sexual intercourse is rooted in the pursuit of apatheia, a concept often misunderstood as emotionlessness, but which in Stoic philosophy refers to a state of inner tranquility and emotional mastery. Apatheia is the condition in which the soul is undisturbed by irrational passions, maintaining a serene and balanced disposition regardless of external circumstances. Sexual relationships, while often celebrated in broader culture for their intensity and emotional richness, are seen by the Stoics as particularly disruptive to the cultivation of this inner calm. The emotions that accompany sexual intimacy, ranging from intense pleasure to insecurity, jealousy, longing, or even obsession, are viewed not as signs of vitality, but as evidence that one's inner state is being governed by forces outside of reason. By abstaining from such relationships, the Stoic consciously chooses to protect the stillness of the mind, cultivating an emotional climate that allows virtue and wisdom to flourish. The path to apatheia is not about the elimination of emotion altogether, but rather about transforming emotional responses into rational reflections. In the context of sexual abstinence, this transformation involves acknowledging the desire, recognizing its nature, and choosing not to be enslaved by it. Sexual passion, by its very nature, is impulsive and consuming. It thrives on stimulation, imagination, and gratification, all of which are fleeting and external. When individuals immerse themselves in these experiences, their emotional states become volatile, easily triggered by the presence or absence of affection, attention, or physical touch. The Stoic goal, however, is to remain emotionally self-sufficient. A person practicing apatheia does not deny that desires arise. Instead, they respond to them with full awareness and control, preserving their mental harmony in the face of temptation. Abstaining from sexual intercourse becomes a training ground for this emotional refinement. Each time a desire is observed and not acted upon, the individual strengthens their capacity for detachment. This detachment is not cold indifference, but a profound and dignified inner strength, a refusal to let one's peace be traded for momentary pleasure. The Stoic learns to engage with life through reason, not through compulsion, and abstinence becomes one of the highest demonstrations of this discipline. In avoiding the physical and emotional turbulence associated with sexual entanglements, the individual remains anchored in a deeper sense of purpose, where clarity of thought and consistency of character are preserved. This pursuit of apatheia also allows the Stoic to transcend the instability that often accompanies human attachments. Sexual relationships, even those rooted in affection, carry risks of conflict, miscommunication, and emotional dependency. When one's inner state is contingent on another's behavior, the mind is no longer free. The Stoic, on the other hand, seeks a mind liberated from such conditions. By abstaining from sexual intimacy, one limits the entrance of potentially destabilizing influences, ensuring that emotional reactions are chosen, not imposed. It is through this lens that apatheia becomes not only a personal achievement, but a philosophical stance, a commitment to living above the turbulence of desire and the unpredictability of romantic dynamics. Additionally, cultivating apatheia does not require isolation from others, but a profound understanding of how to engage without losing oneself. The Stoic can still form connections, offer compassion, and experience joy, but these emotions are filtered through reason and remain under the governance of the will. Abstaining from sex serves as a boundary within which this emotional order can be preserved. It ensures that relationships, if they are to be formed, arise from mutual respect and shared values rather than mutual dependency or sensual compulsion. It supports the development of a clear and consistent identity, one that is not fragmented or swayed by fluctuating feelings. In this disciplined state, the individual becomes less reactive and more reflective. Emotional balance becomes the default rather than a rare occurrence. Life's challenges are met with equanimity, and internal freedom becomes more important than external indulgence. In the end, abstaining from sex in pursuit of apatheia represents a conscious alignment with the Stoic ideal, a state of being in which virtue is unshaken, reason reigns supreme, and the soul dwells in enduring peace. The sixth Stoic reason for abstaining from sexual intercourse is grounded in the principle of focusing only on what is within one's control. This concept, one of the most fundamental pillars of Stoic philosophy, is emphasized repeatedly in the works of Epictetus, Seneca, and Marcus Aurelius. The Stoics taught that peace of mind and personal freedom could only be achieved when an individual learns to distinguish between what lies within their power and what does not. Our judgments, choices, attitudes, and actions, these are within our control. External events, other people's behaviors, the outcomes of relationships, and even the sensations or pleasures that arise from the body are not. Sexual relationships, by their very nature, involve another person's emotions, decisions, and desires, factors that are inherently outside of one's sphere of influence. When one ties their emotional stability to the unpredictable nature of another person's feelings or actions, they surrender their autonomy and risk being thrown into emotional chaos. Engaging in sexual relationships often draws individuals into a web of expectations, attachments, and dependencies. The Stoic views this entanglement as a dangerous compromise to one's mental sovereignty. Even in relationships marked by affection, or commitment, the unpredictability of human behavior can result in anxiety, disappointment, or heartbreak. One cannot control whether a partner remains faithful, affectionate, or emotionally available. These variables, which lie entirely outside of oneself, can begin to govern one's internal world if left unchecked. The pursuit of sexual intimacy often invites these elements into one's life, potentially destabilizing the inner order that Stoics seek to cultivate. Abstaining from sexual intercourse, then, is not about demonizing intimacy, but about removing a major channel through which external forces might gain power over the mind. Epictetus famously taught that freedom begins the moment we stop wishing for things to happen as we desire and begin to accept things as they are. Sexual desire, however, is often fueled by a yearning for connection, validation, or pleasure that one cannot guarantee will be reciprocated or fulfilled. When we make our well-being contingent upon receiving these things, we set ourselves up for suffering. The Stoic instead strives to maintain an internal locus of control, drawing contentment from within and not from fluctuating external sources. Abstaining from sexual relationships becomes a practical application of this principle. By foregoing the pursuit of what is not fully within their control, such as the gratification and emotional satisfaction that comes from intimacy, the Stoic focuses entirely on mastering their own thoughts, responses, and conduct. Moreover, sexual relationships are not just physically engaging, they are emotionally and psychologically involving. They come with hopes, fears, and emotional investments that can shift our focus from the inner self to the outer world. When we are deeply involved in such relationships, we may begin to shape our decisions and actions around the preferences or reactions of others, losing sight of our own path and values. This subtle yet profound loss of self-direction contradicts the Stoic ideal of self-sufficiency. Abstinence, in this context, allows for a powerful realignment with one's own values and goals, fostering a life led from within rather than a life swayed by external events. Additionally, abstaining from sex reinforces the Stoic exercise of daily reflection and self-examination. It eliminates a major area of potential distraction and emotional volatility, allowing the practitioner to better focus on moral progress. The energy that might otherwise be invested in managing the complexities of romantic and sexual relationships can be redirected toward personal development, philosophical study, and meaningful service. It becomes easier to maintain discipline, to wake up with clarity, and to go to sleep with peace when one's mind is not occupied with the turbulence that often comes from being emotionally or physically entangled with others. By focusing solely on what is within one's control and abstaining from that which is not, particularly sexual relationships, the Stoic cultivates resilience, stability, and a profound sense of inner freedom. This detachment from the external is not rooted in coldness or repression, but in wisdom. It is an active choice to live with intention, to preserve one's mental space, and to embody a life of rational clarity and virtue. The pursuit of this clarity demands sacrifices, and among the most difficult is the letting go of pleasures that promise joy, but often deliver confusion and turmoil. The Stoic meets this challenge head-on, choosing instead the unwavering strength of self-mastery and the enduring calm that comes from aligning one's life entirely with what is within their own power to govern. In a world where desires are constantly pulling us in every direction, the Stoic path reminds us that true strength lies in restraint, not indulgence. Abstaining from sexual relationships is not about rejecting human connection, but about reclaiming control over one's inner world. It's about choosing reason over impulse, clarity over chaos, and virtue over fleeting pleasure. When you stop chasing what lies outside your control, you start cultivating the peace that nothing can take away. This is the Stoic way, a life not ruled by urges, but governed by wisdom.